Carlos Alcaraz was asked about Jannik Sinner being in the Qatar Open draw. And instead of giving the usual diplomatic athlete answer about focusing on his own game and not worrying about opponents, Alcaraz did something rare. He told the truth. The uncomfortable, vulnerable truth that most competitors would never admit publicly. "I'm not going to lie," he started. And what came next reveals something profound about their rivalry, about what drives elite athletes, and about why Alcaraz might actually need Sinner to reach his full potential. This isn't the corporate speak we usually get from press conferences. This is raw honesty about how seeing your greatest rival's name in a draw affects you mentally, and what it means for the future of men's tennis. But, obviously, I'm not going to lie. When Jannik is in the draw, you feel it's much more likely that I will reach the later rounds. That motivates me to play at my best, to take it one day at a time, and try to see my name in that final. Read that again slowly. Alcaraz is saying that Sinner being in the tournament makes him more likely to reach the final rounds. Not less. More. Because the possibility of facing Jannik motivates him to elevate his game from the very first match. That's counterintuitive. Most players would feel pressure knowing their toughest opponent is in the draw. Most would play tentatively or nervously in early rounds worrying about a potential clash. But Alcaraz? Sinner's presence makes him sharper, more focused, more determined. "I hope I can play against him, because those are the matches that really make me improve," Alcaraz continued at Doha. That's the key phrase. Make me improve. Not just challenge him. Not just push him, but actively improve his tennis through the rivalry. This is the opposite of what most athletes experience. Usually, great rivals create psychological pressure that makes you play worse. The weight of past battles, the fear of losing again, the knowledge that you're about to face someone who knows your game intimately, all of that typically creates mental blocks. But for Alcaraz, Sinner's presence does the opposite. It unlocks something, raises his baseline level, turns him into a better version of himself before they've even played. Do you think rivalries make athletes better or create mental blocks? Does Alcaraz actually need Sinner to reach his peak? And what does this reveal about how champions think differently? Drop your take in the comments, and let's discuss whether great rivals are enemies or secret weapons. Subscribe because this rivalry is defining men's tennis, and we'll cover every psychological twist. Hit that like button if you think Alcaraz just revealed why the Sinner rivalry is the best thing that's happened to his career. Sometimes your greatest opponent is your greatest motivator. The context of when Alcaraz made these comments matters. It was at the Qatar Open in Doha, just weeks after he'd beaten Djokovic in the Australian Open final to complete the career Grand Slam. He's coming off the biggest achievement of his career. He's the youngest man ever to win all 4 majors. He should be riding high on confidence. But instead of focusing on his own dominance, he's talking about how Sinner's presence motivates him. That shows incredible self-awareness. He recognizes that even after achieving something historic, his improvement depends on being challenged by someone at his level. "You always want to keep pace," Alcaraz said. That phrase reveals the nature of their rivalry. It's not about destroying each other or establishing dominance. It's about maintaining pace, staying level, pushing each other forward. That's healthier than most rivalries we see in sports. Usually, rivalries are built on animosity or proving superiority. But Alcaraz and Sinner seem to have a different dynamic, competitive respect that fuels mutual improvement rather than destructive one-upmanship. The specific claim that he's much more likely to reach finals when Sinner is in the draw is fascinating because it's measurable. We can actually check if this is true or just a perception. And based on 2024 to 2025 results, there's evidence supporting it. When both are in a tournament, Alcaraz seems to play with extra urgency. His level in early rounds is higher. His focus is sharper. He's not just going through the motions against lesser opponents. He's preparing mentally for Sinner from match 1. That preparation shows in results. Alcaraz has won Indian Wells, French Open, and now potentially Doha with Sinner in the draw. The presence of his rival doesn't intimidate him. It activates him. The honesty of "I'm not going to lie" also deserves appreciation. Because that phrase signals vulnerability. He's about to say something true that might make him look weak or dependent. Most athletes would avoid this level of candor. But Alcaraz apparently doesn't care about looking invincible. He's willing to admit that Sinner's presence affects him, that he needs worthy opposition to reach his peak, that his best tennis emerges in response to external challenge rather than just internal drive. That's mature self-knowledge for a 22-year-old. Most young athletes are still figuring out what motivates them. Alcaraz understands his psychology well enough to articulate it publicly. The contrast with how other champions have handled their rivalries is instructive. Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic were all more guarded publicly. They gave diplomatic answers about respecting opponents while privately using rivalry as fuel. Alcaraz is saying the quiet part out loud. He's telling everyone exactly how Sinner affects him psychologically. And there's power in that honesty, because it removes any pretense. Everyone knows now that these two push each other to higher levels. Sinner has expressed similar sentiments from his side. There's a great rivalry between us, but off the court, we also have an excellent relationship, Sinner said, recalling their first ATP meeting in 2021. I was sure he would get to where he is today, whereas I was not so sure about myself. I'm not going to lie. That parallel honesty, both using "I'm not going to lie," shows they're operating on the same wavelength. They're comfortable being vulnerable about what the rivalry means. They don't need to project invincibility. And that mutual vulnerability might be what makes their rivalry so effective at pushing both players forward. They're not trying to psych each other out or play mind games. They're genuinely respecting each other's greatness while using it as motivation. The specific matches between them support this thesis. At Indian Wells, Alcaraz elevated his game in their semi-final. At Roland Garros, same thing. At the Australian Open, Alcaraz reached new heights against Djokovic partly because he knew Sinner was the standard he needed to surpass. Every time they play, both seem to access levels they don't reach against other opponents. Sinner's shot-making becomes even more precise. Alcaraz's athleticism becomes superhuman. The rivalry unlocks their absolute best. That's different from rivalries where one player dominates and the other struggles with the psychological burden. Federer-Nadal had that initially with Nadal dominating. Djokovic-Nadal developed into genuine back and forth. But Alcaraz-Sinner already has balanced intensity where both improve through competition. The iron sharpens iron cliché applies perfectly here. But what Alcaraz is saying goes deeper. He's saying the sharpening starts before they even play. Just knowing Sinner is in the tournament makes him sharper from the beginning. That suggests the mental game between them happens at multiple levels. There's the actual matches where they battle. But there's also the psychological preparation that starts the moment draws are released. And for Alcaraz, that preparation through the draw is a net positive rather than a burden. The timing of these comments at Doha is also strategic, whether intentionally or not. By publicly stating that Sinner motivates him, Alcaraz is potentially applying psychological pressure on Jannik. Because now Sinner knows that his mere presence makes Alcaraz better. Does that make Sinner feel respected? Or does it make him feel like Alcaraz is using him as fuel? Probably both. And that complexity is part of what makes their dynamic so fascinating. The off-court relationship adds another layer. Alcaraz has said they're not close friends, but have mutual respect. That distance is probably healthy for the rivalry. They're friendly without being friends. Competitive without being enemies. That balance allows maximum intensity during matches without personal animosity. Compare that to some historical rivalries that became personal and ugly. McEnroe-Lendl had genuine hostility. Connors-McEnroe had tension. Even Federer-Djokovic had periods where the relationship was strained. But Alcaraz and Sinner seem to have figured out how to keep it purely competitive. They recognize they need each other to be their best selves, so maintaining that relationship serves both their interests. Do you think rivalries make athletes better or create mental blocks? Does Alcaraz actually need Sinner to reach his peak? And what does this reveal about how champions think differently? Drop your take in the comments, and let's discuss whether great rivals are enemies or secret weapons. Subscribe because this rivalry is defining men's tennis, and we'll cover every psychological twist. Hit that like button if you think Alcaraz just revealed why the Sinner rivalry is the best thing that's happened to his career. Sometimes your greatest opponent is your greatest motivator. The head-to-head record between them tells its own story about their rivalry's evolution. As of early 2026, they've split their matches relatively evenly, with memorable battles across different surfaces and tournaments. Each match has been competitive. Each has featured momentum swings. Neither has established clear dominance. That parity is actually what makes Alcaraz's comments so meaningful. Because he's not saying Sinner motivates him to prove he's better. He's saying Sinner motivates him to be better. There's a crucial distinction there. One is about ego and dominance. The other is about growth and improvement. Alcaraz is focused on the latter. He views Sinner not as someone to beat for the sake of beating, but as the measuring stick that shows him where his game needs to go. That's a more sophisticated relationship with competition than most athletes develop. The way Alcaraz described their matches as the matches that really make me improve is also revealing. Because improvement in tennis at the elite level is incremental and hard-won. Most matches don't fundamentally improve your game. You execute what you already know how to do. But matches against Sinner apparently force Alcaraz to find new solutions, to develop new shots, to raise his baseline level. Those matches teach him things about his own tennis that other matches don't. And he recognizes that value enough to seek it out rather than avoid it. This is why Alcaraz saying he hopes to play Sinner isn't just competitive bravado. It's genuine desire for the growth that comes from testing himself against the best possible competition. Most players would hope to avoid their toughest rival until late rounds. Alcaraz actively wants to face him. The psychological framework Alcaraz is operating from is what psychologists call approach motivation rather than avoidance motivation. Approach motivation means moving toward challenges because of the potential gains. Avoidance motivation means moving away from challenges because of potential losses. Most athletes operate primarily from avoidance motivation in high-pressure situations. They're trying not to lose rather than trying to win. They're managing fear rather than embracing opportunity. That's why they play tentatively in big moments. But Alcaraz describing Sinner's presence as making him more likely to reach finals suggests pure approach motivation. He's drawn toward the challenge. The potential clash with Sinner becomes something to move toward rather than something to fear and avoid. That psychological orientation is one of the hardest things to develop in sports. Because our brains are wired for threat detection. We naturally focus on what could go wrong rather than what could go right. Overriding that instinct requires significant mental training. Alcaraz apparently has that training. Whether from sports psychologist Josefina Cutilas, former coach Juan Carlos Ferrero, or just natural temperament, he's able to frame challenges as opportunities consistently enough that Sinner's presence activates him rather than intimidating him. The broader tennis world has noticed this dynamic developing. Commentators increasingly talk about Alcaraz-Sinner as the rivalry that will define the next era. Tournament directors want both in their draws because their matches produce incredible tennis and huge viewership. But what makes it sustainable is that both players seem to genuinely appreciate the rivalry rather than resent it. Alcaraz's comments prove he values what Sinner brings to his development. And Sinner has made similar comments about learning from their battles. That mutual appreciation creates a virtuous cycle. They push each other. They improve through competition. They develop respect for what the other forces them to become. And that respect makes them want to compete more, which creates more improvement. Compare that to rivalries built on animosity or one-sided dominance. Those often become toxic or uninteresting. The players either hate each other and the rivalry becomes personal, or one player dominates so thoroughly that the other becomes demoralized. Alcaraz and Sinner have avoided both pitfalls. They maintain competitive intensity without personal hostility, and their matches are competitive enough that neither feels hopeless against the other. The specific tactical evolution both have undergone partly because of this rivalry is also worth noting. Alcaraz has added more variety to his game, more drop shots, more net approaches, more strategic construction, partly because Sinner's baseline power forced him to. You can't just try to overpower Sinner from the baseline. You need tactical diversity. Similarly, Sinner has improved his movement and court coverage partly because Alcaraz's drop shots and angles forced him to. You can't just stand on the baseline against Alcaraz. You need to cover the whole court and respond to unpredictability. So the rivalry has literally made both players more complete. They've each developed skills they might not have prioritized without a rival forcing the issue. That's the improvement Alcaraz is talking about, not just playing better versions of the same game, but actually expanding what they're capable of. The age factor also matters significantly. Both being in their early 20s means they have potentially 15 years of rivalry ahead of them. They're not established champions protecting legacies. They're young players still developing who can grow together over the next decade plus. That creates different psychology than late career rivalries. There's less baggage, less pressure to prove who's better definitively, more openness to the journey of improvement because they're both still at the beginning of that journey. Alcaraz acknowledging that Sinner motivates him to reach finals might seem like giving away psychological advantage. But it's actually brilliant psychology because it removes any pretense of invincibility. He's not claiming Sinner doesn't affect him. He's owning how Sinner affects him and turning it into strength. That honesty makes him harder to psych out, not easier. Because you can't exploit fears or insecurities that someone has already acknowledged and integrated. Alcaraz isn't hiding from the fact that Sinner pushes him. He's celebrating it publicly. That's a power move disguised as vulnerability. The impact on other players is also interesting to consider. When Alcaraz says Sinner's presence makes him more likely to reach finals, what does that tell everyone else in the draw? It tells them that Alcaraz is going to be even more dangerous than usual because he's motivated by the possibility of facing Jannik. That's psychologically deflating for the rest of the tour. You're not just facing Alcaraz. You're facing Alcaraz motivated by Sinner. That's an even tougher opponent. So in some ways, Alcaraz is using Sinner's presence to intimidate everyone else in the draw. The commercial implications are significant too. This rivalry is marketable precisely because both players are articulate, charismatic, and willing to discuss it honestly. Tennis needs star power and compelling storylines. Alcaraz openly talking about how Sinner motivates him creates narrative tension that sells tickets and drives viewership. Tournament organizers know that having both in the draw increases interest exponentially. Fans know they might get an Alcaraz-Sinner clash, and even if they don't, they'll get both players performing at elevated levels because of the possibility. That's valuable for the sport. The social media reaction to Alcaraz's comments has been largely positive. Fans appreciate the honesty. They like that he's not hiding behind cliches about taking it one match at a time or not worrying about other players. He's telling the truth about how elite competition actually works psychologically. That authenticity resonates in an era where most athlete interviews are scripted and boring. Alcaraz being real about needing worthy opposition and being motivated by rivals makes him more relatable even as he's achieving superhuman feats on court. Do you think rivalries make athletes better or create mental blocks? Does Alcaraz actually need Sinner to reach his peak? And what does this reveal about how champions think differently? Drop your take in the comments, and let's discuss whether great rivals are enemies or secret weapons. Subscribe because this rivalry is defining men's tennis, and we'll cover every psychological twist. Hit that like button if you think Alcaraz just revealed why the Sinner rivalry is the best thing that's happened to his career. Sometimes your greatest opponent is your greatest motivator. The future of this rivalry will likely be studied by sports psychologists for decades. Because what Alcaraz and Sinner are demonstrating is a healthier model of elite competition than we've seen before. Competition as collaboration toward mutual excellence rather than zero-sum warfare. That doesn't mean they're not genuinely trying to beat each other. They absolutely are. But they're doing it within a framework of recognizing that the rivalry serves both their interests. They're competitors who understand they need each other to reach their respective peaks. This is actually closer to how training partners function than how rivals typically function. Training partners push each other hard but ultimately want each other to improve because it makes their own training more effective. Rivals usually want each other to fail because it makes their own success easier. Alcaraz and Sinner seem to have imported training partner psychology into actual rivalry. They compete fiercely but recognize the mutual benefit. That's sophisticated thinking that usually takes much older athletes decades to develop. The question going forward is whether this dynamic can sustain over years of competition. Because rivalries change. As stakes get higher and losses accumulate and Grand Slams add up, the friendly competitive respect can give way to something more intense or personal. Will Alcaraz still feel motivated by Sinner after they've played 30 times instead of 10? Will Sinner continue appreciating the rivalry if Alcaraz starts dominating their head-to-head? Will injuries or personal issues affect the dynamic? All of those are unknowable. Rivalries evolve in unpredictable ways based on circumstances and results. But the foundation they've established, mutual respect, honest communication, competitive motivation without animosity, is strong enough that it could weather changes. The historical precedent is mixed. Federer and Nadal maintained respect throughout despite intense competition. But Djokovic's relationships with both became complicated at times. Rivalries that start friendly can become strained as they mature. And rivalries that start hostile can sometimes evolve into respect. Alcaraz and Sinner starting from a place of mutual appreciation and honest communication gives them the best possible foundation. Whether they can maintain it through the ups and downs of long careers remains to be seen. But the early signs are promising. The impact on tennis culture more broadly could also be significant. If the defining rivalry of this era is characterized by mutual respect and honest appreciation rather than animosity, that sets a tone for younger players coming up. It models a different way of approaching competition. Maybe we see more players talking honestly about their rivals. More players acknowledging that great opponents make them better. More players seeking out rather than avoiding the toughest competition. That cultural shift would be healthy for the sport. The alternative, players hiding behind cliches and pretending their rivals don't affect them, creates boring narratives and teaches younger athletes to be guarded and inauthentic. Alcaraz's honesty is a better model for how athletes can engage with competition and rivals. The specific phrase, "I'm not going to lie," is also worth appreciating because of how rare it is in sports. That phrase signals awareness that you're about to say something potentially controversial or vulnerable. It's a warning that what follows won't be the standard corporate answer. Most athletes never use that phrase because they never say anything that requires that warning. They stick to safe, approved talking points. But Alcaraz using it shows he's willing to be real even when that realness might be seen as weakness. And ultimately, it's not weakness. It's strength to admit you're motivated by external factors. It's strength to acknowledge you need worthy competition. It's strength to be honest about the psychology of elite performance. The coaching implications are also interesting. Because if Alcaraz is right that Sinner's presence makes him better, then coaches should potentially encourage players to seek out their toughest rivals rather than avoid them. To practice against the playing styles that challenge them most rather than the styles that make them comfortable. That's counterintuitive to how most athletes train. They focus on what they do well. They avoid what gives them trouble. But Alcaraz's approach suggests that improvement comes specifically from what gives you trouble if you can frame it as opportunity rather than threat. That's a valuable lesson that extends beyond tennis. In any competitive field, seeking out the toughest challenges and reframing them as motivation rather than intimidation is the path to peak performance. Alcaraz is modeling that approach at the highest level. The final word should probably come back to what Alcaraz said, "I hope I can play against him because those are the matches that really make me improve." That hope, genuine desire to face your toughest rival, is what separates champions from everyone else. Most people hope to avoid their toughest challenges. Champions hope to face them because they understand that's where growth happens. And Alcaraz at 22 already understands that at a level most athletes never reach. That understanding, combined with his physical gifts and mental strength, is why he's already completed the career Grand Slam. And it's why his rivalry with Sinner will likely define men's tennis for the next decade. Not because they hate each other, but because they push each other. Not because one dominates, but because they both improve through competition. Not despite the rivalry, but because of it. That's what Alcaraz revealed with his honest admission. Sinner doesn't intimidate him. Sinner activates him. And that activation is the best thing that could happen to both their careers. Do you think rivalries make athletes better or create mental blocks? Does Alcaraz actually need Sinner to reach his peak? And what does this reveal about how champions think differently? Drop your take in the comments, and let's discuss whether great rivals are enemies or secret weapons. Subscribe because this rivalry is defining men's tennis and will cover every psychological twist. Hit that like button if you think Alcaraz just revealed why the Sinner rivalry is the best thing that's happened to his career. Sometimes your greatest opponent is your greatest motivator.